The grave lay at the edge of a forgotten field, where tall grass bent slowly under a sky stripped of color. No cross marked its presence, no flag fluttered above it. Only a slight rise in the earth and a weathered stone barely visible beneath creeping moss. Whispered that someone had once been placed there. Private Thomas Reed stood in silence, staring down at the unmarked mound. The front lines had shifted months ago, leaving behind this quiet stretch of land that no map bothered to remember. "Does anyone know who's buried here?" he asked softly. The older sergeant beside him shook his head. No records, no tags, no identity. Thomas crouched, brushing away the damp grass with his gloved hand. The soil was firm, settled, as if it had decided long ago to guard its secret. War had names for everything, ranks, battalions, objectives. But here there was only absence. "Everyone deserves a name," Thomas murmured. The sergeant exhaled slowly. "Not everyone gets one." A cold wind rolled over the field, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and iron. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cried once, then fell silent. Thomas noticed something half buried near the base of the stone, a small rusted medallion, its surface worn smooth by time. He picked it up carefully, turning it over in his fingers. No words, no initials, just a fragment of a life that no one claimed. He looked back at the grave. Whoever lay beneath had once breathed, laughed, feared, had once been called by a voice that no longer echoed anywhere on this quiet land. Thomas placed the medallion gently on the stone. "I don't know your name," he said quietly, "but you won't be forgotten today." The wind moved again, lifting the grass in soft, sorrowful waves. And in the hush that followed, Thomas felt the strange certainty that this grave did not hold only bones. It held a story that had been waiting a very long time to be heard. Thomas remained beside the nameless grave long after the sergeant walked away. The field stretched around him in quiet surrender, the kind of silence that followed too much suffering. He could not explain why this unmarked soil held him there more tightly than any battlefield ever had. He knelt again, this time closer, resting his hand lightly on the cold earth. "Who were you?" he whispered. The soil offered no answer, only the rustle of grass and the distant murmur of wind weaving through broken memory. Thomas reached into his coat and removed a small notebook. Inside were lists of fallen comrades, places where he had once stood guard, names that still echoed in his thoughts. He flipped past the familiar ones upon men who had comrades, graves, flags, and stared at the empty line on the final page. Slowly, deliberately, he wrote, "Unknown soldier." This ground. He studied the words for a long moment. It felt inadequate, almost offensive. But it was the only proof he could offer that someone had noticed. A sudden thought unsettled him. What if this man still had a family searching somewhere? A wife who waited, a mother who stared at the road each evening, a child who grew without knowing where his father slept. Thomas looked again at the rusted medallion and felt a tightening in his chest. "I'll find something," he murmured. "Some trace of you. Anything." He rose and began to search the immediate surroundings, combing through tall weeds and damp soil. A few steps away, partially hidden beneath tangled roots, he discovered fragments of torn cloth, rotted but unmistakably once part of a uniform. He knelt again, carefully lifting the pieces. No insignia, no rank, just fabric that had once moved with the body of a living man. He continued until his fingers brushed against something solid, a small metal harmonica, corroded and silent. He lifted it carefully, turning it in his hand. The grave whispered its first faint clue. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, imagining the unknown soldier seated beneath another sky, drawing soft notes from this instrument. Perhaps during a rare moment of peace no one would ever record. "You weren't just a body," he said softly. "You were someone." The wind stirred again, as if acknowledging the truth. And as Thomas returned the harmonica gently beside the stone, he felt an uneasy realization settle over him. This grave was no accident. This silence had been waiting. And whatever story rested beneath the soil, it was not finished telling itself. Thomas could not leave. Even as the light began to fade and the cold crept deeper into his bones, he remained near the nameless grave, the harmonica resting beside the stone like a silent echo of a forgotten melody. He turned it slowly in his hand, examining every dent, every faint scratch etched by time. On its underside, barely visible beneath corrosion, he noticed something. A series of tiny marks, uneven and shallow. Not words, not letters, but deliberate. Thomas rubbed at the surface gently with his gloved thumb until the faint shapes became clearer. 3 small notches. A pause. Then 2 more. A rhythm. He brought it closer to his ear instinctively, as though the metal might still remember sound. The wind slipped through the reeds, releasing a weak, whispering note, thin but unmistakably alive. For the first time, Thomas felt something shift. This man had not been buried in silence. He had carried music. He imagined him now, seated at the edge of this very field, boots resting on soft earth. Harmonica pressed to his lips as night fell over distant gunfire. A small defiance, a fragile hold on humanity. "Play for me," Thomas murmured without realizing. He raised the instrument to his lips and released a tentative breath. A trembling, imperfect sound emerged, but it carried warmth. It carried memory. In that faint note, Thomas felt the presence of someone who had once stood exactly where he now stood, someone who had waited, someone who had hoped. And somewhere beyond that quiet field, unseen and unheard, Thomas felt certain of something else. This grave was not forgotten by the world. It had been avoided. He lowered the harmonica slowly. "Why here?" he whispered. "Why alone?" The sky darkened into dusky gray and the horizon blurred into shadow. The field seemed to breathe with a soft, solemn patience. Then Thomas noticed something else, a faint line in the earth, barely visible beneath the grass. A path worn down not by time but by repeated footsteps, leading away from the grave deeper toward the forest edge. He stood slowly. If this soldier had left something behind, if his story had ever tried to escape the dirt that covered him, then perhaps the land still remembered where he went. And with one final glance at the quiet mound, Thomas stepped onto the barely there trail and followed it into the gathering dusk. Guided not by maps, but by the echo of a nameless soul who refused to vanish forgotten, the narrow trail faded in and out beneath Thomas's boots. A pale scar through grass that bowed beneath the weight of many forgotten steps. The forest ahead swallowed the last light of evening, its shadows deep and heavy, as if reluctant to reveal what they sheltered. Thomas moved cautiously, harmonica still in his pocket, the echo of its fragile note lingering in his ears. The air grew cooler, damper. Leaves crackled softly beneath his feet, each sound sharp in the hush. The path led him toward a broken clearing where the trees thinned and the ground dipped into a shallow depression. Here, partially concealed by fallen branches and creeping vines, lay the remains of a makeshift shelter. Rotted planks, collapsed canvas, scraps of fabric that once tried to offer protection from rain and sky. A forgotten outpost. Thomas crouched slowly, brushing aside debris. Beneath the tattered cloth, he discovered remnants of personal things. A dented tin cup, a cracked photograph blurred beyond recognition, and beside them a small wooden cross snapped in two. His breath caught. This soldier had not simply died here. He had lived here. He imagined the unknown man sitting beneath this fragile shelter, harmonica in hand, listening to the distant hum of war, waiting, perhaps hoping, that someone would come. Thomas carefully lifted the broken photograph. Its image had faded into ghostly pale shapes, but the outlines of two figures were still visible. A man and a woman, their faces unrecognizable, their connection only hinted at in the curve of their posture. "You loved someone," Thomas whispered. The realization struck gently yet painfully. Somewhere far from this nameless field, another heart might have broken in silence, never knowing where this man had fallen or why he never returned. A faint creak stirred behind him. Thomas turned sharply, hand instinctively tightening around his rifle. But there was no enemy, only the wind shifting the branches, carrying with it the scent of moss and wet stone. He lowered his weapon slowly. "This was your last place," he murmured, looking around the shelter. "Not the world's, just yours." The forest seemed to close in around him, not with menace, but with a strange guardianship, as though the land itself had chosen to protect the remnants of this forgotten life. Thomas stood, gaze lingering on the broken shelter one last time. Whatever story this unknown soldier carried, it was deeper than a nameless grave. And now Thomas knew with certainty. The grave was not where the tale began. It was where silence finally found him. And as night crept over the abandoned field once more, Thomas turned back toward the folding horizon, knowing only one chapter remained undone, one final truth waiting beneath the stars. Thomas returned to the grave just before dawn. The field was wrapped in pale mist, and the first light of morning painted the horizon with muted silver. The nameless mound waited where he had left it, quiet and patient, as if it had known he would come back. He knelt once more, this time not as a stranger but as a witness. From the shelter he had discovered, Thomas had taken only one thing: the broken photograph. He placed it gently beside the rusted medallion and the harmonica, arranging the fragments like pieces of a life no one had dared to claim. "You weren't abandoned," he said softly. "You were just lost to noise." He raised the harmonica and played again, slowly, deliberately, letting the quiet melody drift over the grass and into the still air. It was not perfect. It was not polished, but it carried something true, a farewell and a recognition. When the final note faded, Thomas reached into his coat and removed a small strip of cloth. With careful strokes, he tied it to a slender wooden post he had carved earlier and pressed into the ground beside the grave. Upon it, he had etched simple words: "Here rests a soldier, not forgotten, known to the earth and now remembered by me. No rank, no nation, no war, just dignity." Thomas stood slowly and removed his helmet, holding it close to his chest. "You don't need a name for the world anymore," he whispered, "but you will have one for the silence." He looked across the field once more. The soft hills, the whispering grass, the sky that no longer burned with fire. and felt a calm settle over him that war had stolen long ago. Then, as the sun finally broke through the morning haze, Thomas turned away. Behind him, the unknown grave no longer felt forgotten. It felt held by memory, by music, by the simple refusal to let a soul disappear without being seen. And somewhere beyond maps and history, the nameless soldier rested not as an echo of war, but as a quiet story finally allowed to exist.